Sorry, it's good afternoon, a very different timing for On the Hot Seat. Welcome to the latest episode of On the Hot Seat. I'm your presenter, Lee Chin. So today's World Press Freedom Day, but actually I think in Malaysia we have very little cause to celebrate. However, today is definitely a timely occasion to discuss about the status of press freedom in this country. There are numerous blockades before accurate and relevant information could be delivered. And there are also issues how this could be delivered. And information is very vital, as we would have appreciated now in the moment of pandemic. And joining me today is Warshala Naidu, Executive Director of the Center for Independent Journalism, Prof. Zaharul Naim, Chairman of Malaysian Academic Movement, Gerak. Very good afternoon and welcome to both of you, Prof. and Warshala. Maybe you can say hi to our audience.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much, Lee Chin, for having us come on board today.
Well, you're most welcome. You're most welcome.
Thanks, Lee Chin, for inviting me as well. And hi, everyone.
Hi. I know press freedom is actually a very big topic, but I would actually want to start from the point of view of people working in the press or working on news. So how would you describe, I mean, especially in this, since the lockdown or since the pandemic, how would you describe the working environment for journalists in Malaysia today? Maybe I think you have worked with a lot of journalists and you have encountered many of them. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts on this.
Okay. So CIJ, the Center for Independent Journalism, is actually a media advocacy organization. So we are all not necessarily made up of journalists, but we are kind of a media, we support the media. At the same time, we are media watchdogs. And obviously, we are the government's watchdogs as well to ensure there are necessary checks and balances in place. So as a result, what we have seen over the course of last year, there are certain instances, certain incidences which has caused us to be deeply concerned and alarmed. Mainly with the status of media freedom in Malaysia. We've seen a trend where media's access is restricted. We've seen a trend with regards to certain forms of harassment and intimidation against media by the authorities. What this means is it could be a trend or a pattern that would have a very chilling effect really on media freedom. If we just look at Malaysia's rating in the Reporters Without Borders Annual Press Freedom Index, just last year, we actually were ranked at one of Malaysia's best ranking at 101 spot, right? But this year, just given the events that happened last year, we actually are down now 18 points and we are at 119 out of 180 countries which were ranked. Now, this is, of course, not really surprising for most of us within the industry as well as advocacy groups because, we've seen the political turmoil since the Perikatan National Coalition took power last year in March. Of course, there is the pandemic now in place. And as a result, what we see is that the role of media has increased. They are more critical now. They play a really key and important role in ensuring that we are able to, look through the information that we see, the infodemic, and ensure that information flow is timely, reliable, and balanced. So while the role is getting more traction, more importance now, at the same time, they are facing more intimidation, more harassment every time they come across as being critical of the government, or they seem to have dissenting opinions or alternative opinions. So it's almost like, if you don't toe the lines, you face harassment. Just a few days ago, we heard about possible investigations against an Astro Awani TV host. Just prior to that, a couple of days just before that, we got the KDN's media release where they said Malaysia Kini and China Press would be called in, summoned for investigation over the report they did on the deputy IGP. So all these are actually patterns of harassment that we see. Now, in this climate, this landscape, the media is also facing threats to its economic survival. The economic viability or sustainability of media is also a threat. Yeah. And then we see how media is also experiencing other threats in terms of health and safety. Media is yet to be prioritized as frontliners for vaccine. They are also exposed to very heightened risk when they report. The frontliners, not just the journalists, but also the crew, right? When they are out there, the kind of, because most of the events we see at times, I would say by and large, there's been a number of incidences where the ministers or certain events do not necessarily adhere to strict SOP or social distancing requirements. So that places a threat. And when they're not prioritized as frontliners for vaccination, it adds to that. And of course, restrictions of reporting has also happened because a number of press conferences that are held by high-level senior ministers do not necessarily give full access to all media because it's often restricted to official state-owned media only. Just the whole of last year, we saw the way media had limited access to parliament sitting, state assembly sitting. In fact, early days of lockdown, they even had limited access to courts. All this then, places the media in a very difficult situation because they have to be at the front line, being able to access the information and channel the information down through various platforms and medium, but also to enable us, the public, to be able to sieve through all this information and for us to make accurate decisions. Yes. So that's like a kind of a quick snapshot. And if I may just add two more things, the continuing use of repressive laws that silence media has also created this concern that we have in regards to media freedom. We still have laws such as Section 233 of the Communications and Multimedia Act. We have the Sedition Act. We have several sections within the penal codes, particularly Section 504, Section 505. We have the Printing Presses and Publications Act, and a number of other laws which are often used to target and intimidate media. Yeah, so these are all contributing to a situation where media finds itself in a very restrictive space, a very non-conducive environment to fully adopt its role as the fourth estate.
Yes, yes. I don't know whether you're aware, but our title today is actually "Are We Losing Our Fourth Estate?" Yeah. Yeah, it is like, you're answering the question on point. But maybe, Prof, what's your take on this? I think Washala has given us a very good overview of the landscape, but what's your take as an academic?
Well, I think Washala has covered virtually all that I wanted to cover. But essentially, in a word, I would say, if you're asking what the environment is like, in a word, I would say is that it's a dire situation that journalists are in. In three words, I would say that it's a dire and problematic situations that they're in, right? And there are journalists, and I mean print journalists basically, are under threat of extinction due to four, I feel, and these four, I'll summarize what Washala was talking about just now. Four interrelated factors and developments. One is the question of trust. Two is the question of technology. Three is the question of economics. And of course, four is the question of politics. And then not necessarily in that order, right? I mean, very quickly, we're talking about economics and technology, right? The latest report that I read about by the National Union of Journalists states that more than 3,000 employees of various media organizations and newspapers have lost their jobs due to the digitalization of media, right? Then in terms of trust, the ABC, the Audit Bureau of Circulation, has been reported as saying that the daily circulation of newspapers in Malaysia has plunged to about 620,000 in 2019 from 6.4 million in 2014. So that's a massive drop in circulation. Yeah. Politics, well, there's politics, media control and existing legislation, Printing Presses and Publications Act, Section 233 of the CMA, sedition, OSA, 1972 Official Secrets Act. They're all aimed at, if you look at all this legislation, they're all aimed at bettering the media instead of providing space. So if the government doesn't understand that they must nurture that space rather than better the media, you'll never get a vibrant media at all in the context of this country. History has shown in other countries as well. You can't try to do this, you have to provide that space, or else the media then will not have the trust of the people as well. So, and then politics and media ownership, I think this is also quite important, that the nature of media ownership and the relationship of media ownership with political parties especially tend to restrict the formation and development of a healthy environment. That's a fact. Too much political interference in the media, as we've seen, not only for the past, the short period of 22 months, there was a possibility of this thing changing, right? But we're going back to the bad old days, and even worse than that, I would think we are not vigilant enough. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, Professor, I think you mentioned a very interesting point, and I think Washla as well, because many times when journalists are being persecuted or are being taken action under any of the repressive law that you have mentioned, it is always sometimes, especially now, they will be under the guise of the journalists are not doing a great job, they are not reporting the truth, or now we have the fake news. Or the fake news in the emergency ordinance, which could be quite worrying that, and all this create an environment which Professor has said it's a very bad environment to work in. It's not a space for media to act as a fourth estate. But what do you think about this this fake news and how it come about, and as how does it really affect press freedom, Prof? Do you have anything on this?
Well, I think this whole notion of fake news in the context of Malaysia has been blown up by the state, has been blown up by the government, right? I mean, the idea of fake news isn't new, the concept of fake news. Governments have been spreading fake news. Our government has been spreading fake news for many, many decades, right? I mean, it's just now that we've got the internet, right? That news can be countered by possibly fake news and so on and so forth. There's competition in that sense, and immediate competition in the sense. Hence, repressive states, repressive governments are very concerned about that, because their credibility is at stake as well, right? So when they feel that, therefore they pass this kind of laws, and they look at the anti-fake news ordinance that has been set up. One sees words there, terms there that effectively are so general in a sense, and so general, and they are going to be determined. These definitions are going to be determined by whom? By the police, by the judiciary, and by the government. So it's not right in that sense. When the onus is on the person who's being charged to prove that it is not fake news. So that's problematic. So I think many of us fought against this anti-fake news law when the Barisan National Government brought it about before DE14, and I think it should be fought against at this point in time, because it has been enacted with I feel mischievous reasons. We don't need, in any case, we don't need this anti-fake news law given the amount of legislation we already have, or the legislation that the government has in its hands, So I think it's using a battering ram to hammer what you call an ant, and that's very, very bad for journalism.
Yeah. So, Washla, do you have anything to add on in terms of this, where state take action against journalists in the name of, protecting public against fake news, misinformation, and disinformation?
Yes, I would definitely agree with what Prof said. The nature of the legislation itself is very, very punitive. And by making it, and including fines up to 100,000 ringgit, possibility imprisonment up to 3 years. It's creating a sense of fear. Yeah. What we have seen work in a number of other countries when it comes to dealing with spread of disinformation or even misinformation or so-called fake news, right? It should be more educational. It should be attempts by the government to educate the public. It is to provide the necessary clarification, not to punish, not to penalize. Yeah, because the picture that we are getting now is there is only one truth, and the truth is being determined by whom? It's being determined arbitrarily, perhaps by the different agents of the state. Yeah, different agencies, different authorities are determining what is fake news and what is not fake news. Yeah, it's not creating an environment where people are able to provide alternative information, dissenting information, for that matter, because that's when we have a healthy society that is able to debate, that is able to discuss. And by having access to alternate information, we are able to form our own. Yeah, we actually really urge the government, to move away from this punitive approach to any kind of, fake news attempts. So use what you have, as what Prof said. You already have existing laws, which we even think is too much and needs to be repealed. One. You also have huge machinery. You have JCOM now with 40 million plus budgetary allocations given to an entity that should be out there spreading the right information, creating the necessary awareness. Yeah. Instead of doing all that, you are just penalizing individuals and creating the sense where the media, which is already restricted in so many different ways, yeah, has another sword hanging over its head. Now you tend to be then more cautious, and the media, it's likely to self-censor itself. We were talking to some lecturers and some students recently through some of our programs. And what came about is, because of this fear that they have, most often they're not journalists, goes to press conferences, they come back and they did literally take press statements or, quotes from, whoever's, giving the press conference, rather than doing anything analytical or getting alternate information. Because of course, if we look at the trend in Malaysia, even quoting somebody with a video to back you up, you may still face certain kinds of repercussion. So it is really creating a very unhealthy environment, not just for the general public, but also for the media. Yeah. So the more the media starts censoring itself, the more it works within a climate of fear, the less then access that we have to information that we can rely on. So then we will reach a stage where we are only listening to the government's propaganda. It is only one narrative, and it will be the government's narrative. Yeah. And we don't want to go into that kind of situation. We hope that Malaysia will remain a democratic society, and a democratic society cannot have laws such as this, where it is so broad, as what Prof said, it could be fake news could be determined in writing, in videos, audio recordings, and anything that may convey words or ideas will face action. Yeah. It's really problematic. It also gives courts the power to order removal of publications, right? It gives, the ordinance, the emergency ordinance even overrides the Evidence Act of 1950, because it gives police the powers to arrest, enforce, investigate, and inspect, right? And what is really also problematic is the access that authorities now have to data, yeah, as well as, preservation of website traffic data. So it requires now all of us to disclose any stored data if we are suspected of spreading fake news. The impact of it, I mean, we think it's just in the law, but the moment it starts getting broadly implemented, it just cuts across all aspects of society. We've seen how Section 233 of the Communications and Multimedia Act is being used, right? The way it's just literally being used to silence everyone. So that's the picture that we are foreseeing at the moment. And as what Prof said as well, it's really chilling.
Yes. Both Washla has been mentioning the word censorship, especially censorship from the point of media. I think the Malaysia Kini case, the federal court decision, has been really, really alarming, because in the past, maybe media censorship, it's on whatever they're publishing from their site. I think now a lot of publisher with their own website and with the comment section actually have to invest in or creating a team to moderate the comments. That's also very worrying in the development of a freedom of speech of Malaysia, and how freedom of speech is press freedom is going to move forward in this country. So Washla, do you have anything to comment on this?
I think we can spend an entire hour talking about the Malaysia Kini case, right?
Yes, it's very interesting. It is.
But in a nutshell, what has happened is a news entity was penalized for a third-party comment.
Yes.
Yeah, and fined an exorbitant amount that, if we look at any international law standards in terms of proportionality and necessity, it can easily be challenged, right? Now, what are the issues here? One, being held accountable for third-party comments, where you now need another layer of content moderation before it's even published, creates a situation. One, it creates a situation where a person's freedom of expression and speech is being censored. Yeah, and you expect media to censor your readers' thoughts and opinions. That's one thing. The second thing is media. I mean, if we look at the media situation, the landscape now, they're already facing economic challenges. We are now expecting them to add on resources to do this level of content moderation. What would happen is, by and large, most media would just close the comment section. Now, comment section is vital, because by reading news, it's just, if you don't have that opportunity, it's just it's kind of like a one-way interaction, right? Yes. But with the comment section, you're actually engaging in a healthy debate. And there are different ways of how content moderation can be done, after it's posted. Of course, by and large, we also have issues in terms of when comments have already been posted, being taken down. That's also, it can also be arbitrary, right? So there has to be very kind of an approach where we need to create that space and an environment where public would want to engage, because that's when public's just not only reading, accessing, but they're trying to digest the information, and they're engaging in the process. And by doing that, we have a public that's more informed, right, of what's happening in general, and able to influence decision-making processes. It's only this way we can hold our MP at the next election, right, the candidate, to account. So look, these are policies that are being developed, policies that are being implemented. Where are the gaps? This is how we observe, and we do all the necessary checks and balances. By adding this layer, it creates more harm and more damage to our own fundamental freedom of expression, and it creates more harm to media freedom as well.
Prof, do you have anything to add on this in terms of making media responsible for third-party comments?
Yeah, I totally agree. You don't need to put that extra layer there. I think we and by this I mean the people in charge have developed an environment of sensitivity that that is so easily offended. The assumption that Malaysians are so easily offended, that we are too sensitive, which is a myth. Really, this is something that has been played up by various political groups. Yeah, but I think if you're going to mature, if you're going to grow effectively, you have to learn to take criticisms. You have to learn to debate. You have to learn to discuss. Yeah, if you're going to stick to just one point of view, then you're really not going to grow. Whether you're an individual, an organization, or even a government. Yeah? So to me, it's deliberate. it's an attempt to just stifle alternative opinions. It's an attempt to essentially stifle the growth of democracy in a country like Malaysia that has suffered over the many years in terms of the development of ideas and democracy. Yeah. So for me, it's all negative. For me, it's not going to provide anything for us to move forward. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Because I think both of you have mentioned about the repressive law and how the whole environment has been, and it's not very conducive. It's not friendly. It's not viable for journalists to work in it to deliver the public good that is required of their profession. But when we talk about, like, some institutional reform, what should be done apart from doing away with the repressive law? Maybe one of you could give us any idea that, how do we reform and move forward towards like better press freedom in Malaysia?
Well, can I say something first?
Sure, Prof, maybe.
The numerous points here. One is, of course, the repealing of the oppressive acts. You must provide an environment where you can nurture ideas, and you don't nurture ideas when you have this oppressive acts. The Printing Presses and Publications Act, the Section 233 of the CMA, Sedition Act, Official Secrets Act, and there are a few others as well, quite numerous laws, right? But these are the ones that most people talk about. You have to repeal this. Yeah, there are no two ways about it. Yeah. Second, you need to introduce in lieu of all this, then you have to introduce, for example, the Freedom of Information Act, right? A Freedom of Information Act that will provide journalists with the access to data, to information which is needed to provide accurate sort of analysis. Yeah, so you can't have journalists and academics as well trying to do good analysis without having the access to data that are deemed to be officially secret again, which is nonsensical. Yeah, so you have to introduce an act that will provide that kind of freedom. Third would be you have to really, given what was happening prior to this government taking over, the setting up of a media council. Yeah. We have been fighting for a media council, civil society, academics, people in the profession itself. We started with a pro-tem committee. We submitted the findings to the minister of the day. The minister of the day has kept very quiet about it so far, and I think we have to, you're going to say you want to develop the environment. Yeah, if the government is sincere about this to develop democracy, then they must do the things that are necessary in order for that to happen. Yeah, it doesn't happen automatically. The media council is important. Third is the introduction of the concept of public service. Yeah, and I really mean public service here, not government service. Yeah, institutions like RTM, yeah, which are essentially public funded, yeah, taxpayer funded institutions, ought to be for the public. They ought not to be the propaganda arm of any government of the day. The whole notion of public service must be totally imbued by the powers that be, yeah, which they either don't want to or they are ignorant of that fact, right? So, but it's been spoken many times, it's been written many times as well, the notion of public service and the notion of a public media, a really representative public media. Yeah, you can have the commercial television stations, that's fine, but they ought to have a certain standard as well. But more importantly, the public institutions, RTMs of this world, ought to have this kind of notion of public service. Yeah. Then finally, we have to introduce legislation essentially to curb political party ownership and control of the media, to curb political interference in the media. Yeah, these are things you need to provide that kind of environment. Now the thing is, if you are a benign government, if you are a democratic government, that's essentially what you have to think about. Yeah. So if you don't think about it, then what kind of a government do you call yourself? Man? Yeah? Don't talk about democracy when you don't do this kind of things. Yeah. So it's quite, for me, it has been for many years quite disappointing, quite frustrating. Yeah. When governments of the day, our governments over that period of time have said we are democratic, and then they say we're democratic a la Malaysia. What the hell is that? You know, I mean, democracy is democracy. Yeah, representation is representation. Yeah, representativeness is representativeness. So basically, there is a need to call them out for what they are. That they are not really doing what they say they're doing. Cakap tak serupa bikin. Yeah.
Yep. For sure. I think Professor mentioned a few very important reforms that we should be heading. Freedom of Information Act, media, public service media, independent media council, and legislation to curb political interference and ownership. Do you have anything else to add on?
Just a couple of points there. I think what Prof have said, he's basically given us a clear idea of what is necessary for a reform. Reform needs to happen in 3 different ways. One, substantive changes to the laws must happen, laws, policies, and all. And Prof has already given us clear idea. Second thing is really in terms of the structures that are in place for the reform to take place, right? Now, Prof has talked about media council, but just to add on to that is also the necessity for open data partnership. Yeah, that is basically making sure that information is available to all. Yeah, that would really add value and purpose, and it facilitates the access for all media. If this year's World Press Freedom Day's theme is really around information as public good. Now, this is very critical for us because what we tend to forget is that information that is held by public authorities are in principle public. That means it belongs to us. So there is no need for this attempt to put everything under the Official Secrets Act and mark them as rahasia or sulit, essentially confidential. It defeats the purpose because if the information belongs to us, the public, by right, if you look at most information regime across the world, you will see that the approach is to ensure that the government provides or does maximum disclosure, and it's done in a proactive manner. Government discloses information, we access the information, right? That should be the principle. What we see is the third point, which is our culture of secrecy. Yeah, so we have a culture of secrecy where it's best to protect everything so that it does not come under scrutiny. Nobody challenges the decision of the government. So this culture of scrutiny now has another layer, which is the culture of fear. So if you want to challenge the culture of scrutiny, okay, the government then starts with the intimidation tactics, the harassment, the investigation, and the charges under the repressive law. So reform cannot happen in just one area. Reform needs in a holistic manner that really cuts across what I was talking about, the 3 different areas: the substance, the structures, the mechanisms, and the third one is really our cultural mindset. So that's why I think there is a huge role in us as public to demand for these changes and ensure that the government listens to our demands and addresses them, because otherwise it's not just media. Our entire climate of fear would also cover all our freedom of expressions, our freedom of speech. So it will just spiral, and everybody's going to be under scrutiny and the surveillance, and we're all going to be experiencing crackdown. Now, it's not just all in a voice of doom. We don't want to create a sense of fear, but I think there's a sense of urgency. We really need to challenge, we really need to act now, because we don't want to turn up into countries like in our neighboring countries like Myanmar, what's happening in Myanmar, or to a large extent what is happening in Philippines, where journalists are either killed, they're disappeared. We don't want to reach that situation. But if we follow this track and this trend, one day we're just going to wake up and that's what we're going to be reading about.
Prof, do you think we're heading towards that?
Are we heading towards that? We must, like I said before, we must be vigilant, right? The past year has indicated that things are getting worse and worse, right? So whether we're heading towards a bad situation, I think at the end of the day, all will depend on us to take stock of what's happening,
Yes.
and to really not just blindly follow leaders, because they are human beings, and I think we need to take stock of the fact that these human beings are not doing things in a proper manner. So I don't want to sound alarmist, and I don't think uh, we are over the hill, as it were. But we have to be vigilant. Yeah. These things happening are not right, and there is a need to change the situation in many ways. Yeah. Those are the ways that we might want to discuss after this. Yeah. Yeah. With the role of journalists, for example, we talked about this notion about the fourth estate. I mean, do we really have we really had the fourth estate for a long time in the context of Malaysia? I think we must ask ourselves that. For too long, our journalists have been following what my ex-colleague Dr. Mustafa said, have been following a style called Q journalism. You take the cues of ministers and you report on them. I think what Sula mentioned that earlier, that there is no analysis. It's just going there for the press conferences, taking them and taking what they have to say, leaving early, and then just writing essentially what their press releases are. So I think that there is a need for more critical sort of journalism as well. So we talk about protecting journalists, but we have to ask ourselves, who are these journalists that we have now? Yeah, the economic crisis, the pandemic, the new technological changes have resulted, like I said, in a lot of journalists losing their job, and also a lot of organizations trying to cut corners. Yeah, so now we have senior journalists being laid off, so we get junior journalists coming up. Yeah, and you expect them to instantly be able to report in a critical way. I doubt it very much. Yeah, I've been in academia. I've been teaching the so-called journalists in different universities, and many of them are still raw, and they come in there, and and many of our academics are very conformist in nature. So the media programs are very conformist in nature also. So you get journalists going out there saying, I'll not touch this, or if I touch this, I have to toe the line. So it's all self-censorship already. Yeah. So there's this need for journalists themselves to be aware of what they want. Yeah. To not see their task as just doing a job, as it were, but to fight for a cause.
Yeah. Rather than cari makan, right?
Yeah.
No, I think, Prof, you actually brought us to a very good point. It's about quality journalism. It is only with quality journalism we can deliver the public good or the information that is really, really relevant and, allow our audience to be more informed, or our readers to be more informed. And I think, Prof, you have mentioned, and both Prof and Washala have mentioned Independent Media Council, in a way that it works as a self-regulating body to maintain this quality. But why are we not, it has been a very long time since, since I've joined press since like 12 years ago, and it has always been in the talks, and it has never materialized. What do you think is, like, apart from the government, what are there other obstacles to it, or are there any resistance from the press industry itself?
Are you asking me, or is it what's up?
Oh, yes. Prof, do you want to answer it first? And Wasla could, jumped in. I'm so sorry. I should have given.
Go ahead, Prof. Yes.
Yeah, I think all of us are to be blamed in many ways. Yeah. And I think the system itself, the whole economic system, why journalists work is also to be blamed. I mean, I said cari makan, but that's the nature of the system that we have, the economic system, that they're looking for a job, and in terms of keeping their job, they'll have to essentially navigate certain ways of doing things, and often this is learned first in the university itself. They're taught, there are these rules, stick to them, and don't break these laws, and so on and so forth. I've seen this happen in journalism classes and so on and so forth, but the students are not encouraged to question this. These are the laws, irrespective of the fact that laws are created by human beings who have self-interest. I think that's the first lesson that students need to learn, that laws are not God-given. The laws in terms of media are not God-given, and therefore you have to essentially unpack those laws, the history of those laws, the circumstances behind it, which are the parties that will benefit from those laws. So that's at the university level. And then when they come to work in the newsroom, again, there's another set of rules that are provided for them, house rules or house style and so on and so forth. And this is again related in many ways to the ownership and control of those organizations, because and again, that's why I said the political interference and the political buyout of those institutions, all this affect the way that journalism, the way that things are reported, things are covered. You can't run away from that. I mean, the various newspapers that have over the years, the Utusan, for example, the New Straits Times, even the Star, how they are related to particular ideas and particular interests, right? So when you have all these things and you don't question or dismantle them, then invariably you're going to have the same old thing coming about, And people might say, so what? Well, so what is that you have the same things coming about, and therefore you're not a really informed person, And if you're not really an informed person, how can you improve the situation? I always ask my students, is the situation perfect? If the situation is perfect, then we don't do anything. But I can tell you, whatever you say about perfection, I can tear that down, with a few statements, with a few examples. And that's the job. That's our job, essentially, to show that imperfection and then to build from there the possible building blocks of change, of reform. There is a dire need for reform. So you can't run away from that. And it's bad for a society. It's bad for, if the culture is that kind of culture of, of just not questioning. And we won't grow that way. And we will allow despots to take over. And we will follow them. They will pull us by the nose, and we will follow willingly. And I don't want that kind of lifestyle that kind of life for my children and grandchildren. So, and I don't think any of us want to. So I think that the understanding of what freedom and democracy is all about, and the implications on freedom and democracy of all this control by people, we tend to. You see, the trouble with us is we tend to give them the control, and then we say, "Oh, now we are powerless." Don't give them the control in the first place. If it's dangerous. I'm not saying that but then I'm not saying that they're bad guys necessarily, but they're not saints either. So I think that there is that need to be vigilant, as I said, and to understand our own particular power that we have, the particular power that we have, and obligation.
Prof, just out of curiosity, do you get more students aspiring to be journalists today than many years ago? It's such
that's again in public universities over the past 15 years, 20 years. It's again how you promote what you're doing. I mean, in many public universities, programs like public relations, advertising are the ones that people are going to because they say this is the market, and that's the fault I feel of universities. We're not just supposed to prepare like a factory, like a whatever for students for the market. We have to prepare individuals who are going to go out there with ideas. I feel right, and it's this whole notion of tapering them, of tailoring them towards particular market what you call it, market driven sort of forces has resulted in this. Where journalism is not popular, where students are encouraged to take so-called easy courses, or glamorous courses, and to do journalism and to read and write seems to be such a problem, or has been made such a problem. And I think we shouldn't blame the students. We ourselves have designed courses of that nature that are not critical. So no, I don't. Journalism these days, journalism courses are not as popular as they were before, unfortunately.
That's why it's very hard for us to get colleagues nowadays.
Yeah.
But Lichin, just to add though, if I may, just a couple of points. I think what we need to see, I completely concur with what Prof's saying about the nature of journalism and what is being taught at times, right? But I think at the same time, there is also a growing population of youth who are more informed.
Yes.
They may be from School of Journalism, School of Communications, but also other schools, right? Other faculties. And if we can work with this cohort of youth as voices of change, I think there's a lot of room for us to move ahead. Just recently, last month, CIJ in partnership with University Science Malaysia and University Utara Malaysia had a really small virtual camp on right to information. And following that, the students were encouraged now to come up with their own projects around freedom of expression, freedom of right to information, and media freedom, right? And they are mainly from communication schools, mass comm, and so on. Now, this young student, you don't get the whole lot. You get small groups of them who are, there's one group who are now going to be working on their youth podcast. Because you just need to work with the youth. If you go to CIJ's website, we actually just launched it yesterday together with the youth. It's going to be completely run by youth, to get the youth's perspective in terms of news, how they digest news, how they can ensure independence, and how they can ensure different voices are reflected in their news in terms of diversity and inclusion. So it is the small group of people who are now going to be voices of change. And I think we need to give a lot of support beyond the kind of curriculum that they have and see how we can work with them. I'm completely inspired, for example, by Undi 18 and the kind of work they do. I'm also very inspired by what Ayn, as an individual, has managed to do in getting the entire nation to sit up and ask questions about what's happening in our schools. And I think these are things that for many years we've not seen. I'm a product of public university, and I really can understand the environment there. It's really not conducive for us to even think. We basically just churn out everything that's taught to us. But there are people, and I think we need to find a way to create a really supportive and constructive and enabling environment for these voices to grow. If I could just also take a little bit of time, if you don't mind, to talk a little bit about the Media Council and where the challenges lie. Prof have given us a really important scenario. Now, added to that, when we talk about Media Council, for the last few decades, there have been different players around this. It's been led by, say, publishers, owners, right? It's been led by journalists. It's been led by civil society. And all of us are addressing the government because we need the government to enact a law to give it the necessary powers and enact it. So that means everybody's got different agenda, right? So where is the carrot for everyone? So we saw a little window of opening during the previous government when there was a possibilities for the publishers to get their carrot, which was basically to say, hey, if you're going to establish a media council, let's address the legal environment. What is the legal framework and what kind of reform? Now, most journalists, most media, including the owners and publishers, are already so suppressed at times by the regulations that are in place. The licensing requirement, the surveillance, the scrutiny in terms of digital spaces and digital reporting. There's so many existing laws. So when we were moving the conversation forward, there was a possibility for these laws to be either amended or repealed in totality, right? So that gained a lot of momentum and support from the publishers. Now, on the other hand, what we are facing now is a government that it's somewhat, I would say, silent on the Media Council. Since the Pro Tem Committee submitted the report and the bill in August last year, the government came back to the Pro Tem Committee once with a list of questions, which has been responded to in January this year. In between, there's been questions raised in Parliament, and the responses have always been the same. we need to engage in more stakeholder consultations. And I don't know what other stakeholders they're talking about, because there's been so many stakeholders consultation. So today, one of the reasons why CIJ, Garam, and the National Union of Journalists Malaysia went over to hand the memorandum to the minister, although we knew the minister's apparently on MC, and he announced it last week. We did it because it's necessary for the minister to know that we want answers. We need the government to give us these answers that we've been asking for. There are very clear demands. So a government now, when we talk about self-regulating independent body, that means the government's going to lose less. Its own powers are going to be reduced in the way it regulates and controls the media. So it is like a kind of like a bowl filled with different agendas that's like trying to sink or swim here. I think we need to get above everything and talk about why it's absolutely necessary for all parties, to move forward on this. For the whoever's viewing it, there is actually going to be a session today at 8:30 where you have an opportunity to talk to a few members of the Pro Tem Committee. You can directly ask them questions about what are their view on media freedom, as well as their views on what is being proposed for a Malaysian Media Council. So it's a live session today.
Is it available on CIJ's page?
Yes, it will be available on CIJ's page. We have an event page for the World Press Freedom Day, which has got 3 events for the last 3 days, and we will end our festival basically today with it's a Sembang More with the Pro Tem Committee. Prof. Zahrom is also a member of the Pro Tem Committee. So
thank you so much. You both still joining us today, and now at this moment that you're gonna work late again tonight.
Unfortunately, I won't be there tonight.
Oh, okay. Very busy schedule.
Okay. All right. I think it has been close to like an hour. I mean, it's about an hour since we started this conversation, and both like Prof as well as Washala has touched on very, very important points regarding to press freedom in Malaysia. It's in dire need of reform, and there are some reforms that has been stalled, delayed, and some people might be, it could be quite jaded because we are not really moving forward. Instead of we move a little bit up the ranking and then down we go last year, 2020. So I think we've mentioned the challenges, the required reform. I think as a concluding remarks, can Prof, because public has to play its role. It's not only something that's relevant to the press industry or to the journalist or to the news publisher, but the public has to play a role in that to make a lot of things happen. So Prof, do you have anything just like a short remark, concluding remark for this discussion? So tell the public that what they can do or how they can contribute to press freedom.
Yeah, well, basically, the one line I would put would be put your money where your mouth is. That's what the public ought to be doing. Good journalism, especially investigative journalism, costs money. At one point, we would buy newspapers, we would subscribe to newspapers, but we seem to be reluctant to subscribe to online news. And therefore, online portals are suffering, I feel. So I think if that's going to be the future of the media, the public also have to be able to support in that kind of sense. If we willingly pay for a newspaper, I don't see why we're reluctant to do the same with the online news. Then we're talking about specific publics now. Advertisers, for example, advertisers will have to come to the fray. Advertisers were there for mainstream media, for the old media. But I see the support is trickling support coming in for online media. I think there is a need for advertisers also to provide that kind of support, right? And then the public also has got to be more discerning and critical. And this is related to what we're talking about, the education of the public, not necessarily formal education. We're talking about media literacy, for example, where there is a need for the public to be aware that, some things are false and some things are not. It's education in many ways. The public has got to be more critical. And of course, the government too must contribute. At this moment in time, media organizations are suffering. And I think this is a time, it doesn't matter if the Prime Minister says there's no money. I'm sure they can find money somehow. If they can find money for new posts for politicians, I don't see why they can't provide money for the sustenance of the media. So the governments must come in. They must provide support, financial and other, and etc. In these times of suffering. It is what responsible governments do, right? And I think there is a need for us to demand that our government becomes more responsible. Yeah, I believe it has been irresponsible for quite a while now. Yeah, so as citizens of this country, concerned about the media, concerned about the development of ideas and knowledge in this country, I think we ought to demand that. Yeah. We have every right to demand that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Prof. And Washala, what about you?
Maybe a couple of things in terms of what Prof was saying. What kind of support we can give the media? I look at it as in two ways, right? One is the kind of support that we can give media to promote media freedom. Other hand, we also want to hold the media accountable, right, to responsible, ethical, and quality reporting. I think both works hand in hand. One way that we want the government to channel our money, public's money, through the taxes that we pay, is to establish a media resilient fund. I think this is really important to deal with small media entities which had to downsize or shut down, journalists or media crew who've faced retrenchment in the course of the year and a half. A fund is absolutely necessary now to support and at least sustain some aspect of livelihood, some aspects of the operation of media during the pandemic. This could be through small grants offered to individuals or small media organizations, or it could be tax incentives given to media owners and so on. I think this is really necessary because we want the industry to survive, and it's so important now to have this fund. We have small organizations doing it, NUJM setting up a certain fund. We have the civil society actually providing legal defense fund, for media or individuals or human rights defenders who are facing investigation and so forth. But we need the government to act, yeah? Now, government's not acting with their own money, they're acting with our money. So that's why it's important for public to push for accountability from the government. And one aspect of this accountability is make sure that they set up a fund to support the media, because without media, we are going to be in a situation where our information is going to be determined just by the government, or it's going to be a one-way track, or we are just going to be relying on all the different platforms that are controlled by big giants and big tech firms, who use our information and who benefit, through their own advertising on these platforms. So there are so many different things as public we can do. We really need to also use our voices, demand for change to our MPs, to our current government. Just keep demanding. Today is World Press Freedom Day, and I just wish everyone who's listening or watching can just place a demand today to protect our media freedom and to enhance and strengthen our media freedom. It's just individual voices matter and voices count, and we just have to keep repeating that, actually.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is a very good note to end this discussion. For whoever that's watching it, our audience, I think both our speakers have mentioned something very important. We all have a role to play in media freedom for Malaysia, for a better Malaysia. So play your part, either subscribe to quality journalism, or voice out for the need of press freedom, make our government accountable, make them fund media, ensure that good media and good journalism can continue in this country, because it's very, very important. It's the foundation of democracy. Thank you for watching today. Thanks, Professor, and thanks, Washala. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Lichin. And thank you,
Thanks,
Professor.
Lichin.
It's always fun to be on the same platform.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.